I'm David Hutchins with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, the United States and Europe ponder options after the IAEA says Iran is in pursuit of nuclear weapons. Evidence suggests Syria fails to comply with its Arab League deal, and scores more are dying. And VOA Middle East is about to embark on a new era online. We'll tell you about it. It's all ahead on The Voice of America. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has rejected the findings contained in a report by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which said there is credible information that Tehran had engaged in activities aimed at developing nuclear weapons. Ahmadinejad said his country will not retreat from its nuclear path. The UN's nuclear watchdog agency said it had serious concern about the information, indicating Iran has worked on a nuclear weapon design, including the testing of components. Some world powers have long suspected that Iran has nuclear weapons ambitions, a charge Tehran has repeatedly denied. VOA senior White House correspondent Dan Robinson captures reaction from the White House and Congress late yesterday.
Senior Obama administration officials say that although the report does not conclude that Iran has restarted the same kind of program it had in place before 2003, it raises concerns about possible ongoing research related to nuclear weapons development. Senior administration officials say the report does not make any judgment as to how advanced an Iranian effort might be to develop a nuclear device that could be placed on a missile, saying that they could not discuss intelligence assessments. But they say Iran's government needs to respond to the report. The officials were asked about the difficulty of building support in the United Nations Security Council, specifically from Russia and China, for new sanctions, given the report's finding that some of Iran's nuclear activities might have been for peaceful purposes. The officials pointed to IAEA findings on Iranian work on fast and multi-point detonators as what they called a very telltale sign of nuclear weapons development. The IAEA report is being examined closely in the U.S. Congress, where lawmakers say it provides more momentum for legislation moving through the House of Representatives and U.S. Senate to tighten existing U.S. sanctions on Iran. House Committee on Foreign Affairs Chairwoman Republican Ileana Ros-Lehtinen says the IAEA report demonstrates the need for the United States and other nations to take decisive action to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Democrat John Kerry heads the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
A lot of conversations are taking place right now to figure out what the best responses are going to be, but it clearly means we have to ratchet up on Iran, probably tougher sanctions among other things.
Republican Senator Mark Kirk is co-sponsoring legislation with New York Democrat Charles Schumer aimed at Iran's central bank. Kirk says stronger sanctions on Iran might be needed.
In the end, we may also have to think about a oil quarantine on Iran so that Iran cannot sell oil. That would quickly collapse the economy. If you don't do that, then you basically push, especially Israel, into considering a military option. And the reason why is because Iran has transferred all of its advanced weapons that it currently holds to Hezbollah, including cruise missiles. I think there's a near 100% chance that once Ahmadinejad develops nuclear weapons, he will give them to Hezbollah. And I don't think the world can put up with that.
The IAEA board is to decide whether to report Iran to the UN Security Council. U.S. officials have not commented on extensive media reports, including in Israel, speculating about potential military action against Iran. President Barack Obama has said no option has been ruled out regarding Iran. Senior Obama administration officials repeated that on Tuesday, saying the United States is committed to doing what we can to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, but they said there is additional space to continue increasing the costs for Iran for its behavior. Dan Robinson, VOA News, the White House.
The international community is also expressing concern about the IAEA report on Iran. Lisa Bryant reports from Paris and says that specialists say the West has few options in getting tougher.
International reaction has so far been low-key to the International Atomic Energy Agency's newly released report on Iran's nuclear program. The report says that although some components of that program can have civilian applications, Others are specifically linked to nuclear weapons. It suggests Tehran has created computer models of nuclear explosions and experimented on nuclear triggers. Once again, Iran has rejected allegations its nuclear program has any military aim. On Wednesday, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said the country would not retreat from its nuclear activities. French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé says Paris is ready to push for tough new sanctions against Iran if the country refuses to answer questions about its nuclear program.
Ce rapport est très détaillé, il est accablant. Il montre que dans toutes les technologies qui permettent de fabriquer une arme nucléaire...
In an interview with RFI Radio, Mr. Juppé said the IAEA report was detailed and damning, and Iran's actions were unacceptable and violated UN resolutions and international law. He said the IAEA's Board of Governors should condemn Iran and that the United Nations Security Council should take up the matter. The Security Council has already passed 4 sets of sanctions against Iran, but 2 permanent Security Council members, Russia and China, have so far shown little appetite for more. Security analyst Dave Clementi of the London think tank Chatham House says the international community has few options.
The U.S. seems likely to continue with the sanctions that already exist, in part because it would be difficult, if not impossible, to get any increased level of sanctions. Certainly through the Security Council, that would be nearly impossible.
Clementi also doubts Israel will carry through with warnings of a possible military strike against Iran's nuclear program.
We could see something. I think it is unlikely because it would have strong repercussions around the region. It certainly exacerbate instability that already exists. I think it would have unforeseen consequences, certainly for the U.S.
Clementi notes the report comes amid increasing concern about Iranian policy and actions. Last month, Washington accused Iranian officials of plotting to kill the Saudi ambassador to the United States. The IAEA is expected to examine its latest report on Iran during a board meeting next week. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Paris.
Demonstrators confronted a Syrian opposition delegation outside Arab League headquarters in Cairo today. Some protesters called the opposition figures traitors and pelted them with eggs. Reporters say the protesters were apparently concerned that the opposition figures would agree to a dialogue with Syrian authorities. The confrontation forced the 4-member delegation to postpone its meeting with League officials until later today. They were to discuss Syria's continuing crackdown on anti-government dissent. The Arab League plans to hold an emergency session on Saturday to discuss the apparent breakdown of an agreement under which Syrian authorities would halt violence against anti-government demonstrators. Activists say more than 110 people have been killed in the week since Syria announced it had agreed to the plan. Joining me by the phone now is Jeff Newman, VOA super stringer based in Beirut, who's covering the Syria story from the Middle East, and also Cecily Hillary, our senior reporter based in Washington, D.C., who's been watching events on social media. Jeff, I'd like to start with you. What can you tell me about the current situation in Syria now from your vantage point, and specifically the city of Homs?
Well, over the weekend and early this week, there was heavy street fighting in several districts of Homs, which is the 3rd largest city in Syria, and which has more or less become the epicenter of the uprising against President Assad. I spoke with one resident from a suburb of the city today who said that entire neighborhoods have been encircled by the Syrian army over the last couple of weeks. And while this is impossible to independently verify, it fits with many other reports that suggest the same. And last week, there were reports of massacres of Alawi in the area. And the Alawi are a minority sect in Syria, and President Assad is Alawi, and obviously he draws much of his support from there. So since the uprising began, the biggest fear has been that sectarian fighting would break out. So reports of massacres are particularly disturbing.
Right. Now, Cecily, I want to bring you in. You're doing something for our new social journalism platform, Middle East Voices, called Syria Watch, where you're basically looking at video coming out of the region and comparing that to supposedly the agreements that the Assad government has made with the Arab League regarding ending its crackdown. What are you seeing?
Well, basically, the videos, the tweets, the pictures, everything I'm seeing shows that the Assad regime has violated just about every point of the agreement with the League. On one point that's very interesting, on Saturday, Damascus said it had released or was releasing about 530-some prisoners for the Eid al-Adha celebration. I've been trying to find just one report of one actual homecoming. I haven't. Some people say nobody was released. Others say only people unrelated to the uprisings were released, like petty thieves and shoplifters. Other than that, the violence continues. Everything's consistent with what Jeff is saying. Homs is really the epicenter of the whole thing. It's been under siege. It hasn't let up at all. The neighborhood of Bab al-Amr is the worst. It's in the southeastern part of Homs, and it's witnessed the greatest number of people dead. Last week alone, the LCC has been saying that 40 have died alone. That was 2 days ago, and I'm still trying to get a better count.
Anything to add regarding the humanitarian situation there, Jeff?
As the fighting increased this week, the humanitarian situation has, by all accounts, deteriorated along with it. I spoke to a Syrian on the Lebanese side of the border today who for months has been moving food and other necessities across the Homs, and he said the journey has always been difficult and dangerous, but that it's near impossible to get across now for a number of reasons. The Syrian army has some areas under tight control. They've laid landmines along the illegal crossing routes and have bulldozed several river crossings that can handle motorbikes, which are used to carry the majority of the goods across. And there are major shortages of just the basics in Homs right now, and it sounds very dire.
And one last topic before I let both of you go. Obviously, we're reporting on Syria. Cecily's based here in Washington. Jeff, you're based in Beirut, using sources that you've developed. But it is very difficult for journalists to be operating freely in Syria because of the restrictions, despite the fact that one of the terms of the Arab League agreement is to allow more freedom of reporting and freedom of movement. There's a new report about the repression of Syrian journalists out today, Cecily. Can you give us some information about that?
Well, it's actually an update of a report that came out a few days ago by the Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression. What they were doing was monitoring all sorts of violations in Syria that occurred between February and October last month. The documentation is just astonishing. They're saying 114 cases in which various forms of human rights violations were committed against 99 different journalists, bloggers, and intellectuals. 81 of these alone took place in Damascus. They're documenting, there's so many cases, it's hard to get through it. 32 cases of arbitrary detention, 76 cases of enforced disappearances. Samira al-Masalma's case, she was the first woman chief editor at any Syrian newspaper, Tishreen. She was fired in August, that's probably one of the more notorious violations that they've reported on, or notorious journalists. 9 journalists have been detained more than once. 13 female journalists and bloggers have been detained. So it's really a very, very concise report on exactly who suffered what, trying to cover the uprising. And the bottom line is nobody's free to report.
And Jeff, I just wanted to have you chime in on that as well. Do you know of any journalists in the region or sources in there trying to do journalism, and what's the safety situation for them?
Occasionally, every once a week or once every 2 weeks or so, a foreign journalist will make it in by crossing the border unofficially. And going on the part of the Arab League deal that said the foreign journalists would be let in, to my knowledge, no one has been let in under this agreement that I know of. Personally, I've applied for a entry visa through the Syrian Foreign Ministry and have heard nothing back. And just about every journalist in Lebanon has done the same. And to my knowledge, I don't think anyone has been approved or let in under that agreement.
Well, we'll certainly be watching Syria, the Assad government, and this Arab League deal. Thank you. Jeff Newman, VOA Super Stringer, based in Beirut, and senior reporter Cecily Hillary, based in D.C. Afghan officials say Afghan and NATO troops have killed at least 70 Taliban militants who launched an attack on a base near the Pakistani border. A spokesman for the governor of the Paktika province, Mukhlis Afghan, said the combined force repelled the assault late Tuesday in the Barmal district. NATO said a large group of insurgents attacked the base with small arms and rocket-propelled grenades. Troops called in coalition air support to help fight the militants. A NATO spokesman said there were no reports of coalition casualties. The provincial spokesman said the militants came from the border region. Earlier on Tuesday, Australia's defense ministry said an Afghan soldier shot and seriously wounded 3 Australian and 2 Afghan soldiers at a base in the south. This week, the United States observes Veterans Day this Friday, a national holiday to remember and honor military veterans of all wars. Veterans Day dates back to the end of World War I. This year, it comes less than 2 months before all U.S. troops are due to leave Iraq, and while nearly 100,000 American service members are still in Afghanistan. Elizabeth Lee talked to veterans at a community college near Los Angeles and found they have differing views about the U.S. military presence abroad.
These students at Santa Monica College share a common bond. They are military veterans who meet once a week for friendship and support. For some, the realities and horrors of war are still very real.
When I came home, it took like 3 years to transition after getting out. And there was such a feeling of being lost that we were given no transitional training, no decompression.
Monica Skates served in the first Gulf War against Iraq 20 years ago. When she returned home, she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder.
I lost my marriage, I lost my family, my home.
She eventually received treatment and has just started college. Fellow Army veteran Daniel Anderson served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. He joined the military because he was not doing well in college. Another veteran of the war in Afghanistan, Christopher Bellingham, joined the military to get money for college. All three served in the Army, but their views on America's future course in Iraq and Afghanistan are not the same. Skates says U.S. troops should not pull out of Iraq at the end of this year.
To be honest with you, no, because it'll be just like what we did in Vietnam. We have to stabilize the people first, and they don't have a stable government. They don't have a stable force.
Anderson disagrees.
I think it's about time that we pull out because they, I think, are ready to stand up and take it on their own.
Anderson says he is not sure whether the fight in Iraq was worth the cost in either human or military terms.
I'm glad that Saddam Hussein was ousted from power, and there is a lot of corruption, and you could see it. But that's just a much more muddied water, you know. I think it's that war was a political, strategic war, as opposed to like a necessary on-the-ground fight.
Bellingham says the U.S. should also get out of Afghanistan.
There's no purpose anymore. You know, we've pumped so much money into that economy that we are their GDP. We are how they're making money now. Regardless of when we pull out, they're not going to be able to sustain them to the level that we brought them up to.
But Anderson says the Afghan people need U.S. help against the Taliban.
I think the people are really oppressed by that terrible organization, and I think that one is really worth fighting for.
All three veterans say they do not think that Americans fully understand what their troops are fighting for in Iraq and Afghanistan. In part, they blame the American news media.
Talking heads on TV, it gets lost in opinion as opposed to fact.
For these veterans, their experiences in the military are shaping their future plans. Skates and Bellingham want to pursue careers that will help other veterans of war. Anderson wants to be a screenwriter to tell stories of his experiences. Elizabeth Lee for VOA News, Los Angeles.
The alleged mastermind of the deadly bombing of the USS Cole in the year 2000 is scheduled Wednesday to face a military judge before a war crimes tribunal in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. From Guantanamo, VOA correspondent Meredith Buell has details.
Abid al-Rahim al-Nashiri, a 46-year-old Saudi of Yemeni descent, is scheduled to be arraigned on charges that include murder, terrorism, and conspiracy. He could face the death penalty if convicted. Nashiri is the first alleged high-ranking al-Qaeda figure to face a military tribunal at Guantanamo since U.S. President Barack Obama ended a freeze on such trials earlier this year. He was captured in 2002, interrogated in secret CIA prisons overseas, and transferred to the detention center at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba in 2006. Nashiri's attorneys argue he should not be prosecuted since he was subject to the near-drowning interrogation technique called waterboarding and mock executions. Richard Kamen is the lead defense counsel and an expert in death penalty cases.
By torturing Mr. Nashiri, the United States has really lost all moral authority to try and kill him.
The chief prosecutor, Army Brigadier General Mark Martin, says any confessions resulting from torture will not be allowed in court.
Let me start with an important provision in the Military Commissions Act that requires statements that are admitted to be voluntary, and it precludes the admission of any statement obtained as a result of torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment.
The attack on the Cole, 2 suicide bombers in civilian clothes waved at the crew and then drove their boat full of explosives into the side of the warship. The blast tore a large hole in the side of the ship, killing 17 sailors and injuring dozens more. Prosecutor Martins argues a military commission is a fair way to decide Nashiri's case.
The accused in a military commission is going to be well represented, and he's going to have capital counsel that know how to defend him and how, if he is found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, how to present a mitigation case.
However, defense attorney Kamen says a military commission will not provide his client with a fair trial.
This is a system that is organized to convict. It is organized to kill. There is nothing about this that is fair.
Defense attorneys have said Nashiri's treatment while in U.S. custody will be a major issue during his trial. They predict the case will take at least several years to resolve. Meredith Buell, VOA News, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Well, tomorrow marks a special day for us at VOA Middle East. It's a watershed of sorts. We will be launching our new social journalism project for the Arab Spring on Thursday. It's called Middle East Voices. Now, this site is basically a group blog and a community devoted to tracking events of the Arab Spring in a collaborative way, where our audience submits articles and viewpoints along with our own reporting. This has been a pet project for our team, and particularly myself, and online editor Yuri Holtajczyk here with me now, and he's going to help co-manage the site with me. So let's probably tell people the mission of this site. Taken from our missions page, it's designed to be a collaborative journalism platform. It seeks to combine investigative journalism, crowdsourcing, participatory writing, and social media technology to redefine how stories in and about the Middle East should be told. That sound accurate?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've been working on this for several months. And Yuri, well, let's tell some people about some of the features they'll find.
Well, the one big feature is an innovation called Viewpoint and Counterpoint. Basically, it's an entirely new approach to how opinions are presented. In traditional journalism, as we know, you have the reporter tell the story, and if there's controversy, the reporter will balance the piece with 2 or more sources representing varying points of view. In Viewpoints and Counterpoints, we take the reporter out of the equation and let members of our community speak for themselves. So rather than being reporters, we assume the role of moderators, because every viewpoint we publish, and it'll strictly be labeled as such, will elicit a reaction. Now, other community members can react to a published viewpoint in 2 different ways. They can comment on our very liberal commenting platform, or if they feel really strongly about it, they can submit a counterpoint, which we may then publish as a standalone piece with a link off to the original viewpoint. And we believe that this is really unprecedented in the sense that this is a truly open platform for debate and really a form of journalism that listens.
That's right. And that's just one of the features we'll have. There'll still be in-depth analysis from our own reporters, features, behind-the-scenes reporters' notebooks from our people in the Middle East. We'll have some humor in there, some humorous lists, some useful lists for resources you can use, and even some mini documentaries. What we really want to do is build a stable of promising bloggers and promote incisive commentary and reporting.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that for almost a year now, we've been using our Facebook page, which is also called Middle East Voices, to build the community for our site. We have about 5,600 fans so far, and we're hoping to grow that community. And it's fairly large already, but if people want to join, they should simply Google Middle East Voices on Facebook.
Yeah, get involved with us then. Thanks to all of our staff, and you know who you are, and our community for making this possible. We'll be starting tomorrow on our new adventure at MiddleEastVoices.com. Comment, share stories that you like, and contribute. International Edition is next.
VOA Middle East is building an online network of reporters, bloggers, and citizen journalists called VOA Middle East Voices, and it's only on Facebook. You're invited to send us news tips or submit your own story ideas. Post links to underreported stories on our wall and participate in ambitious citizen journalism campaigns. Simply go to Facebook and search VOA Middle East Voices. Join the conversation.